Hello, Archie Dunlop here with Talking Astrology with Archie on Friday, May the 10th, 2024. There's been recent news stories about an assassination attempt on Volodymyr Zelensky, the president of Ukraine, or at least there was a plan to assassinate him. I think there was a story that he was going to be assassinated on May the 5th, and I think there have been some arrests in Ukraine, and I thought it would be a good idea to have an update on Zelensky. I have tried to avoid talking about Zelensky in these videos because, in past videos I've sometimes gone on a bit too much about Ukraine and Zelensky, so I thought I'd sort of give it a break, but I think now is a time to just have another look at his chart and what is going on. I mean, it does seem to some extent that Zelensky is a survivor. He has got a lot of planets in fixed signs. He's clearly very determined. And that, of course, reflects the country that he's president of. When you are president of a country, you are the head of state. And in a way, you are the country. Even if you don't have much power. We don't really know how much power Zelensky actually has. It's sort of a bit of an enigma. I know that his critics say that he's just a puppet. I'm not convinced that that's entirely the case. Looking at his chart, I don't think he's someone who is just a complete instrument of other people. But at the same time, he is a president, and when you become a president of a country, when you become head of state, you, to an extent, become a tool of the cosmos, don't you? When you've got big things about what happens to Ukraine, that is almost out of the hands of individuals. That is about the collective destiny, and when you become president of Ukraine, I suppose, you become an instrument of whatever this collective destiny actually is. Though, before I talk about Volodymyr Zelensky and what's going on for him and his country, I want to consider what's going on today. And today is Friday, May the 10th, 2024. So here is the chart for today at noon. As always, I set it for New York, simply as a matter of convenience. And you will see that the moon continues to move through Gemini. There is the moon at 23 Gemini at noon. And it's making a square aspect to Saturn. In fact, at noon it's separating from a square to Saturn, and it's applying to a sextile of Mercury. So with the moon in Gemini, moon, remember, it's in an air sign. Moon is about communication. Remember, the moon is a planet of communication. We often think that Mercury is the planet of communication, but in many cases it's the moon. The moon is just how we respond. And with the moon in Gemini, we can respond through words. And words can be a very good defense system. If we feel we're unsure about what's going on, we're under pressure, what do? Well, we talk. We can talk about anything. And we can change the subject. Now, the moon is making this square to Saturn. And so that does create a certain sense of limitation, moon square Saturn. This is especially the case if you are outside the Americas. If you're in the Americas, the moon square Saturn is kind of fading. But if you're outside of the Americas, I think the moon square Saturn is still very real and very present. And there may be a feeling that, you'd like to express yourself. You'd like to get your ideas out into the open. You'd like to be emotionally free, but there's something holding you back. Saturn in Pisces can be about sort of mud. It is about mud. It's an emotional placement, Saturn in Pisces, but it can be about trapped emotion, pools of emotion, puddles of emotion, puddles of dark emotion that seem to be going nowhere. And it's reminds me, I think one of Crowley's tarot cards is labelled Saturn in Pisces. I believe that is the Eight of Cups. It might be the Seven of Cups. I think it's the Eight of Cups. Is it Seven of Cups? I don't know. I don't really regularly use tarot cards, and I don't claim any expertise on it. But I know it's one of the cups in the Crowley book of Thoth deck is connected to Saturn in Pisces, and it's just about puddles. It's just about mud. I'm pretty sure it's the Eight of Cups. It could be the Seven. I'm trying to remember. But it's that image of puddles, of mud, and that may be holding us back. Just too much emotion, but emotion getting trapped. So we do have to consider that with moon square Saturn. But the moon is sextile Mercury, and that moon sextile Mercury is really good because the moon and Mercury are both communication planets, as I've just said. So it does allow us to speak with power and conviction, and we don't just say things for the sake of it. Once we get beyond that moon square Saturn, so perhaps what some of us are experiencing is something really holding us back, moon square Saturn, and we can't get the words out, and then suddenly we can break free and we can really start to communicate. That's one way of looking at it. Another way of looking at it is to see moon square Saturn and moon square Mercury as two possibilities, and we have got a certain choice about which possibility we're going to follow. If we choose to get involved with things that are heavily emotional and complicated, then perhaps we're going to start to live things out in a moon square Saturn way, and we're just not going to be able to express things fully and properly. If, on the other hand, with moon sextile Mercury, we're more forward thinking, we don't worry about complicated emotions, we sort of deal with things that are just fun and spontaneous, then maybe we can move past the moon square Saturn, and with that moon sextile Mercury we can really tell the world what we think, and through our words we can actually create action. That is moon sextile Mercury. So I think that moon sextile Mercury is very positive. Now, one aspect that is brewing that we do need to be a little bit aware of is a semi-square between Mars and Uranus, and this aspect is getting really close. Mars semi-square Uranus. There you can see there's Mars 742 Aries, and there's Uranus at 2257 Taurus. So Mars and Uranus are now 45 degrees apart, and it's a feature of tomorrow as well. And with Mars semi-square Uranus being 45 degrees apart, it is potentially quite a dangerous day. At one stage, I think Boeing were talking about launching their Starliner today, having another go at it. I believe they've now cancelled that. Any idea of it being launched today? It's going to get launched on the I think the latest date is May the 17th. Correct me if I'm wrong. And so that's great that Boeing are not launching their rocket today with Mars semi-square Uranus. That would be asking for trouble. But with Mars semi-square Uranus, there could be there could be violence, there could be unpleasantness, there could be difficult things to deal with. A lot of us could get annoyed. It's certainly not a time to be doing anything dangerous. And you know, if you've got Uranus aspecting your one of your personal planets, you know, that could be really difficult. I mean, for example, in my forecast for the weekend, I talked about King Abdullah II of Jordan, who has, I think he has his moon in Scorpio, and he currently has Uranus opposition his moon, and that means that Saturn is that Mars is sesquiquadrate his moon. So he's someone who, you know, he has to be very careful over the next day or two. I don't know what's happening in Jordan, but of course, you know, when you see Uranus opposition the moon in someone who's very famous and very powerful, it doesn't mean to say it's going to have an impact in any way that we're going to find out about. It could just be something about what's going on in his personal life. But I did notice that. But that's one individual who may be affected by this Mars semi-square Uranus. But all of us do have to be careful. We just shouldn't do anything dangerous. It's not a time for taking risks with Mars semi-square Uranus. And in terms of the midpoints, I noticed that the Sun is aspecting the Mercury-Saturn midpoint. And this gives sort of a different flavour to the day. And with Sun aspecting the Mercury-Saturn midpoint, you can... Let me just show you where the Mercury-Saturn... So the Mercury-Saturn midpoint would be about sort of 5 Aries, something like that. So the Sun is semi-square, the Mercury-Saturn midpoint. That may be a time that many of us feel that we need to call a halt onto something. It could be, we may feel that something has gone on for long enough and we may want to cut ties with it. And it may be a time to bid something farewell, something that's been with us for a long time, and we've decided that we've had enough of it, or there's just a natural parting of a wave. So that is possible. I think it's quite fairly gentle, that Sun on the Mercury-Saturn midpoint, but maybe there's a slight tinge of sadness there. And at the same time, though, Mars is aspecting the Sun-Jupiter midpoint. So there is the Sun-Jupiter midpoint around 22 Taurus. So Mars is aspecting the Sun-Jupiter midpoint. That can be about successful action. But when we talk about successful action, we have to remember that Mars is also semi-square Uranus. So there is the opportunity to take successful action today, but we must make sure we don't go too far and that we don't take risks, as I've just said, because Mars is semi-square Uranus, and that could cause trouble. So that's some of the main features of the geocentric picture today. And looking at the heliocentric solar system, the solar system with the Sun where it should be, in the middle. I don't know if you can see it, but there is a certain pattern here. If you have a look at this chart, there's a symmetry. Can you see that there's Mercury and Venus? And if you take Mercury and Venus and you take Chiron and Pluto, so Chiron and Pluto share the same midpoint as Mercury and Venus. So that means that the Mercury-Venus midpoint is on the Chiron-Pluto midpoint. Further, there is the midpoint of Mars and Saturn is on all of it. So can you see that pattern, that symmetry between the Mars-Saturn midpoint, the Chiron-Pluto midpoint, and the Venus-Mercury midpoint? Let me just see if I can show you that. I don't know whether this program will allow me to do a 90-degree dial of a heliocentric chart. Yes, it will. So let me just show you what I mean. So looking at the Mars-Saturn, so I'm moving this dial round until I put it. You see, can you see that's the Mars-Saturn midpoint? And there is the Mercury-Venus midpoint, and there's the Mercury-Venus midpoint, and don't think this chart shows Chiron, but that's also on the Chiron-Pluto midpoint. So there's a lot of symmetry forming between the Mars-Saturn conjunction. The Mars-Saturn, well, it is a conjunction, but that Mars-Saturn conjunction is triggering Mercury-Venus and Chiron-Pluto. So the question is, what does that mean? I think it could be quite a high-pressure day from a heliocentric perspective, because Mercury-Venus is about, I suppose, how we communicate and how we show what we can do, and it's on the Mars-Saturn midpoint, and it's on the Mars-Saturn is about frustration, and so it could be that if we're feeling really frustrated about something, that we feel that things really aren't moving. With the Mars-Saturn on the Mercury-Venus midpoint, we may be able to deal with that frustration through creativity, through some kind of creative endeavor. We can't perhaps address a problem directly, but we may feel that instead we can appear to be addressing it through our art, or by whatever our number one talent is, maybe a way of dealing with it. But we do have to be careful about things that are artistic and beautiful and our own creativity, because if Mercury-Venus is on the Mars, if a Mercury-Venus midpoint is on the same place as a Mars-Saturn midpoint, that could be about the destruction of art, the destruction of things that are beautiful. So it is a day when beautiful objects need to be protected, particularly if those beautiful objects are very important to us. It's not necessarily about their value. It's in terms of their financial value. It's just more about their importance. So things of beauty and perhaps even sentimental value need to be protected today, and that might be one way this aspect is working its way through. But we shouldn't forget that it's the heliocentric picture, and so this heliocentric picture is more collective, I think, and so countries, nations, groups have to look at what they value and protect what they value. So that might be one way of looking at it. But I suppose Mercury-Venus can be about communication and how we try to persuade. And so if it's on the Mars, if you've got the Mercury-Venus midpoint on the Mars-Saturn midpoint heliocentrically, it's about people trying to perhaps make us afraid, because fear is a good way of of controlling us. Isn't that right? So those are a few thoughts about the heliocentric picture. I know that's a bit technical, but I just thought I would express what I noticed. And now I want to go back to the geocentric solar system and do my forecasts for the for the 12 signs. So these are my forecasts for today, for the 12 signs, for Friday, May the 10th, 2024. Aries, you're in a good position, I think, Aries. You're able to express yourself very powerfully. After all, Mercury, the communication planet, is in your sign. It's in Aries, and it's sextile the moon. So moon sextile Mercury. If you've got something to say, then now is very much the time to say it. And you will be able to express yourself with power and conviction. And at the same time, you're going to come over as being an interesting person. The things you say won't just help you move forward with your own agenda, but other people will listen and they will say, yes, this is exciting, we want to be part of it. So, Aries, it's important that you don't hold back. It's also important that you don't get too emotional, because the moon is squaring Saturn. It's squaring Saturn. It's also making a sextile to. It's also making the sextile to Mercury. While that moon sextile Saturn may be something more about sort of earlier in the day, maybe more about if you're living in, for example, Asia, Australia, New Zealand, I suppose even Europe. It could, that the influence can still hang around, and it may just be that you have some fear that you're not really addressing, but at the same time it's bothering you, and this fear could be holding you back. And I think that this fear is largely unreal. So if there's something that needs to be said, Aries, then I just didn't think it's very important that you say it. And I do believe that you are going to be able to express yourself not just in a verbal way, just with the words, but you're able to bring to bear great power. And I think that you can stir things up. If things are not the way you want them to be, you can create change. Of course, there is this question about how far do you go? I mean, Mars, your ruler, is semi-square Uranus. So with Mars semi-square Uranus, it's accident-prone. It can be a little bit violent, this aspect. And if you're going to cause disruption, which you can be very, very disruptive today. And, this might be a good thing. Maybe things need to be disrupted, but you have to be in a position where you can actually handle this disruption. Because once you start something, it may be very difficult to stop. So don't just go storming in unless you've got a plan. I know it's nice to be spontaneous, but if you're too spontaneous, you could just get caught up in the chaos. And a reminder that, with Mars semi-square Uranus, you may be a little more accident-prone than usual. And so on a physical level, Aries, you really do need to be careful what you do, careful where you step. Because if you plow on without thinking, then you could very soon run into trouble. Turning to relationships, I think it's important to have a respect for the people close to you, or even people who are not too close to you, but people who you have to deal with all the time. It's very easy to just think about your own priorities and your own plans. What about other people's plans? In particular, what about people's need to better themselves, to improve their position. Because I think that's going to be important. And it might be a good idea to think about the people you're with all the time and to ask yourself, what are their plans? What are their future plans? You know, we always think about our future plans, but what about another person's future plans? What do you think they want to do in a year's time, 5 years' time? Are you helping them? Are you in their way? And it's something you need to consider. Maybe you should ask them, because I think that there are people you're in contact with who actually are not happy with the way things are, and they want things to be better, and they're looking for improvement. And I think this particularly is the case if you're in a close relationship with someone. You know, they're not entirely happy with the status quo, and they may not be showing it, but they want some change. They want room for self-improvement, and you can help them and you can hinder them, but really it's up to you. And so in terms of relationships, just ask yourself, of all kinds of relationships, ask yourself, how is this person benefiting from this relationship with you? Or maybe they're not benefiting from it, because if they're not benefiting from it, there's a problem. And so I suppose, you know, you just need to consider perhaps how certain relationships need to be changed so that the other party can actually benefit and grow from a relationship and not be restricted by it. Taurus, you probably are still somewhat concerned about money. I mean, I think money should be an issue for you. There's absolutely nothing to be ashamed of there. Bills have to be paid, and you have to make sure that you do have got enough money. And with the moon in Gemini, still in Gemini, I think that Taurans, remember Taurans is quite a materialistic sign. With moon in Gemini, I think many Taurans are thinking about their finances and wondering how things could be better. And with the moon making a square to Saturn, some Taurans may be feeling a little bit negative about their financial prospects. I mean, I don't want to overstate that, but I suppose if you're feeling a bit negative, there should be the impulse there to make things better. And you certainly don't want to get caught into some negative cognitive set where you just think that things are difficult financially and just that's the way it is and there's nothing you can do about it. Because the moon doesn't just make a square to Saturn, it does make a sextile to Mercury. And that moon sextile Mercury should give you good ideas for making things better on a financial level. You really can. So think about your situation. I'm not saying your situation is bad, but I suppose when it comes to money, people always think that their situation could be better, however rich they are. But that moon sextile Mercury is about talent. It's using your ability to work out how best to give your financial situation a boost. And so that's something that you really need to work on. Also, I suppose the moon is sextile Chiron. In fact, you could say that the moon is sextile the Mercury-Chiron conjunction. And so it may be that you feel with that Chiron perhaps a certain financial wound, that there's a hurt there somehow, that you haven't been treated properly financially. But it's okay. Now you are starting to think about the issue and you're starting to work out how you can make things better. And I think if you trust your abilities and you trust your talents, I really do think you can make good progress in this area. And in a general sense, Taurus, you should not be happy with the status quo. The status quo is there to be changed. Now, I understand that, Taurus is a fixed sign, and Taurus can get stuck in a particular way of thinking and a particular way of being, and can reach a stage where they think, well, this is the way it is and there's nothing I can do about it. But right now, it's not good enough. Things could be better, and you certainly should not be satisfied with second best. And the reason you're having these feelings of dissatisfaction is because the opportunity is right there in front of you to improve things. And that's certainly that's certainly something you can do, and it's something that you absolutely should be doing. It may be difficult, at least to begin with. It's going to require some effort on your part, but if you put in that effort, I don't think that you'll be sorry. Now, you may find that other people can be helpful. You may find that other people can be helpful. It's because there are people out there who've got incredible energy and incredible enthusiasm, and if you listen to them, perhaps take them into their confidence, they could really do you the world of good. On the other hand, we have to remember that Mars is making a semi-square to Uranus, and in the Taurian chart, Mars is ruler of Scorpio, your opposite sign, and so Mars can represent another person, and that Mars semi-square Uranus can represent a person who is just too hasty, too headstrong, that could cause a lot of trouble. And so these kinds of people should be avoided. Also, there may be one or two people around you who are accident prone, who could get themselves into trouble, and perhaps, Taurus, you can be a bit of a restraining influence. Gemini. The moon is still in Gemini, your sign, and the moon is making a sextile to Mercury. And I take the view that this sextile between the moon and Mercury is really very fortunate. After all, Mercury is your ruler. And so, Gemini, I think that you're going to feel that you're in the right place. That whatever's happened in the past, everything is coming together. And your thoughts and your actions are in sync with one another. So it's very important today to have self-confidence and to believe that just about everything is possible. Though I kind of have to qualify that, because Mercury is making a conjunction to the Sun-Neptune midpoint. Now, this needn't be a problem, but I do think you need to be aware of it. So the principle of Sun and Neptune can be a weak sense of self and a confused sense of self. And so if Mercury is on the Sun-Neptune midpoint, it's just possible that you start to put energy into something which is really not appropriate. It's just, at best, a waste of time. Or at worst, it's just an exercise in getting absolutely nowhere. And so I know I've contradicted myself here. I'm saying, in general, it's a day when you can be really very clear about yourself and be, be very dynamic and be successful. Provided, though, you don't stray into a difficult and complex area represented by that Mercury on the Sun-Neptune midpoint. So perhaps you need to ask yourself, whatever you're doing today, do you understand it? Are you completely clear about it? Do you have any doubts? Sometimes Geminis can plow on with something, even though they have big doubts about it, even if they don't really know what they're doing, where they're going, why they're doing it. They just keep, but almost out of excitement, out of curiosity. Let's see what happens. Curiosity killed the cat, and maybe curiosity killed the Gemini. So don't be too curious. I know it's tempting, it's exciting, but you have to be sure. You have to be sure of yourself, because if you're acting out of curiosity, and that means if you're curious, it means you don't know the full picture. Because if you knew the full picture, you wouldn't be curious, would you? So if you're motivated by curiosity today, then I think that is a bad motivation. You just need to be motivated by a general understanding of what's in front of you. And if you are, then I'm really confident that you're going to make really good progress. Also, today, the Moon squares Saturn. Now, that Moon square Saturn is going to be more a feature if you're in the old world, Europe, Asia, Australia and New Zealand. I mean, I think you'll feel it to an extent in the Americas, but the further east you go, I think the stronger it's going to be. But that Moon square Saturn could actually be quite useful. I mean, I know that I've been negative about Moon square Saturn, but Saturn is in a high-profile sector of your chart. Moon is in your sign, and so with Moon square Saturn, that does actually give you the capacity to be very disciplined and to have a lot of focus, and yes, to be hard-working. And so in your case, I think you can actually benefit from that Moon square Saturn. Other people, other signs may not be in such a good position with that aspect, but I think for you, I think that Moon square Saturn is going to be useful for just enabling self-discipline and control and focus. And so overall today, things should be fine provided you stick to what you know. And just remember, where there's curiosity, there is danger. Cancer. The Moon is not in your sign yet. Okay, if you are in the Americas, the Moon does go into Cancer at 11:13 this evening. If you're in New York, goes into Cancer at 8:13 this evening if you're in Los Angeles. So yes, if you're in the Americas, then in the last hours of the day, you might see a changeover. And with the Moon going into Cancer, you might suddenly feel a lot more definite and a lot more in control and emotionally in control. But you're going to have to be up fairly late. I don't know what you're planning on doing this evening if you're in the Americas, but I suppose if you're a night owl, or if you're, I suppose, we're going to a party on Friday night, you might go to the party thinking not much is going to happen, but when the Moon goes into Cancer, there might be a sudden lift, a sudden burst of energy. But for most of the day, even if you're in the Americas, the Moon is in Cancer, and if you're not in the Americas, the Moon is going to be in Gemini all day. So I think we can say that it is a Moon in Gemini day. So with the Moon in Gemini, it's the sign just before Cancer, and so it is a time when we need to have, Cancerians need to be a bit reflective. the time for dramatic action has not arrived, and instead we need to pause and reflect and think. After all, the moon is in Gemini. Remember, moon is your ruler. It's in Gemini. It is sextile Mercury. I think that suggests to me that Cancerians have a very active mind right now. And in order to stimulate this mind, okay, you might want to have some low-profile contact with other people. There's no harm in that. If you want to find out about something, then talk to someone about it. I think you can have some very stimulating conversations and contacts with friends and associates, but just don't take things too far. It's really, in most cases, is not a day for dramatic social initiatives. Just keep it on an even keel. Don't feel that there's anything that you absolutely have to do. But as I've just said, your thoughts are moving fast. There's a lot you're thinking about, and I think that you may reach some important conclusions today. I know that the moon is in Gemini, so with the moon in Gemini, you are perhaps actually a little more open-minded than usual. You are prepared to consider things that in the past you weren't prepared to consider, especially with moon sextile Mercury. There's nothing that is absolutely closed to you on an intellectual level, and you may actually reach some conclusions that maybe a good idea really does start to form. And then as the moon goes into Cancer, okay, it might be this evening if you're in the Americas, it'll be tomorrow, Saturday, if you're not in the Americas, then you will start to see how action can take place. Even though it'll be the weekend, I think that you are going to be more dynamic tomorrow, Saturday, than you are today. Now, one word about relationships. The moon is square Saturn, and that square between the moon and Saturn could be a bit of a problem when it does come to relationships, because Saturn rules Capricorn, which is your opposite sign, and so if the moon is you and you're square Saturn, that suggests that you and someone else don't entirely get on, in a temporary sense at least. And this moon square Saturn is probably strongest at the beginning of the day, more of an issue if you're outside the Americas, but it's still there, this moon square Saturn. And it could be about having a misunderstanding with someone, maybe about beliefs. You realize that you and someone else have different beliefs about an important subject. Could be a political belief, could be a religious belief. So that is a possibility. And so what do you do when you and someone else have different beliefs about something important, different, or perhaps just generally different philosophies on life? And ideally, you would just accept the situation. But you may actually be quite annoyed by another person's stubbornness. You just realize that someone is really stuck in a particular way of being, in a way of thinking. And maybe you'll see it for the first time. When you realize that someone is so stuck, you'll be thinking, well, how can this ever change? And so some Cancerians might take the view that this is a time to distance themselves from another person, especially as, from a midpoint perspective, the Sun is on the Mercury-Saturn midpoint, and the Sun on the Mercury-Saturn midpoint can be about saying goodbye. Now, that Sun on the Mercury-Saturn midpoint is not really specific to Cancerians, but it just when you put it together with the moon making that square to Saturn, that may be how you feel. Now, just because you feel that you want to say goodbye to someone today doesn't mean that you're going to feel the same way tomorrow. And it just may be a passing feeling, just a passing feeling of irritation when you perhaps realize that another person is very stuck in their ways. But overall, I mean, I wouldn't worry about it too much. Leo, nothing lasts forever, does it? And, I was just talking to Cancer about the Sun being on the Mercury-Saturn midpoint. Now, for you, that Sun on the Mercury-Saturn midpoint could be quite important because the Sun is your ruler, and yes, the Sun is semi-square, the Mercury-Saturn midpoint. So that pair, Mercury and Saturn, can be about having to distance yourself from another person, perhaps realizing that maybe something is over, or at least a phase is over. So you are quite realistic today, and going back to this idea that nothing lasts forever, and you may feel that it is time to move on, especially when dealing with certain people. Perhaps you and someone else had an association which had a reason, and maybe you've accomplished it. Maybe you've taken things as far as you can, and now it's just time to say thank you and goodbye. Though I should emphasize that I'm probably more talking about shorter term relationships. I'm not talking about I don't think I'm talking about longer term relationships. Perhaps you've been with someone for a couple of days or a couple of weeks, or you've had an association with them for a couple of days or a couple of weeks or whatever, and you're perhaps thinking that it has just reached a certain stage and things can't go on for any longer. But it's not anything negative. It's just the point that, if you want to meet new people, you have to say goodbye to old people. I don't mean old people as in old as in age, just people who have been hanging around for some time. You have to perhaps clear things out, and that may be how the Sun on the Mercury-Saturn midpoint is working. Also, with the Sun hitting the Mercury-Saturn midpoint, it does mean that Leos are going to be more serious than they have been of late. Yesterday I was, really emphasizing the fact that the Sun was conjunct the Venus-Jupiter midpoint. It's still conjunct the Venus-Jupiter midpoint, but some of that optimism connected with the Sun on the Venus-Jupiter midpoint is still there. But we're now starting to have to think about something else, Sun on the Mercury-Saturn midpoint, and that is a sense of realism. And this sense of realism is pervading your life, and I think that is a good thing, and it allows you to perhaps accept that perhaps in some respects in the recent past you were over-optimistic, and that now you have to get back to reality. And it's a natural process. It shouldn't be hard. And we have the Sun still in Taurus. Remember, Taurus is a sign which in the Leo chart is connected with success and progress and making yourself known in society. Sun is still there. Jupiter is still in Taurus. But now you're starting to realize what is required and what you need to do. And yeah, it's hard work. It's serious. I know it's Friday, end of the week, supposedly, but that's no reason to stop. The weekend, perhaps you've got a few things to do over the weekend, a few things to plan over the weekend, and so with that realistic approach, I think you can really set yourself up nicely for next week. Now, I'm not suggesting that you have to isolate yourself at all. The moon is in Gemini. The moon continues to be in Gemini, and from your perspective, the moon in Gemini is a very sociable place for the moon to be in, and the moon is making a sextile to Mercury. And that moon sextile Mercury does create the possibility of new ideas and new concepts. So on one hand, I understand you are being more serious and you are perhaps being a little more skeptical than usual. So it's okay to be skeptical, but you don't want to be completely skeptical, to completely rule out the possibility of new and exciting ideas actually having any impact, because they can have an impact. And you need to be skeptical, but with an open mind, because that's what the moon sextile Mercury is the creation of a possibility of new ideas, new concepts. Obviously, you mustn't take new ideas at face value. People are telling you stuff. Maybe you're meeting people, they're telling you stuff, and it sounds interesting, but is it real? So keep an open mind, but of course, be skeptical. And if you can get that balance right, then today you can actually educate yourself, or rather, it may be that some of your friends and people around you are able to educate you in terms of giving you access to new knowledge, which very soon you'll be able to take advantage of. Virgo, you have to be a little careful today, because I think there is some danger that you have a misunderstanding. You might hear something or see something that you think you get it, but actually you don't get it, and you see something that sort of propels you into a course of action that could be very time-consuming, but it could also be futile. So do be careful, Virgo, how you expend your energy, because there is a danger that you expend too much energy in completely the wrong direction. So in a way, that is the bad news. The good news is that the moon is making a sextile to Mercury. Mercury is your ruler, and this moon sextile Mercury can be very useful provided you handle it correctly. Now, a sextile is not a trine. A trine is a very easy aspect with no resistance. A sextile requires a little bit of hard work. And the moon is in Gemini. So Gemini is a high-profile sign in the Virgo chart. And this does indicate that you can be you can really get some good ideas. Now, some of these ideas are going to be garbage. That is true, and you certainly should not follow bad ideas, and that is a danger. You find something interesting, you think it's the key to everything, and you chase it. So don't jump to conclusions with this moon sextile Mercury. But if you are in a high-profile situation, I think that you will really start to understand what is happening. And you will get new ideas. You don't have to pursue these ideas straight away. But I think by following your ideas, you can really set yourself up very nicely. And I think that today could be quite a good one for you. And I suppose part of the way you need to work is not to reveal your thought processes to other people. Some of your thoughts are quite secret, they're quite private, and the wheels need to turn slowly in the darkness. And as the wheels turn, you start to get an increasingly vivid picture of the way things should be. So from a work career perspective, I think today you might arrive at some important conclusions. These conclusions do not necessarily have to be shared, but I think you're going to have a real sense of understanding today, and just make sure that you just don't run a fool's errand. I mean, I think you could run a fool's errand. I think that is possible. It's because Mercury, which is your ruler, is on the Sun-Neptune midpoint. You may just get distracted. You follow something without really thinking it through, and so maybe today it's a time to be assessing the evidence rather than actually acting on the evidence, and in that way you'll be creating a situation perhaps next week when you can really start to make things move. So do handle that in the right way and understand your strengths, and I think your strengths are perhaps intellectual at the moment, and your weaknesses are perhaps also intellectual. Being distracted by something shiny. It seems interesting. You want to go for it, but it's not. And the best way of dealing with this problem is not to just take initiatives for the sake of it and perhaps hold something back and not feel perhaps that you have to do anything today. Maybe it will wait until tomorrow. So that is the broad picture today. I don't think there's anything that you necessarily have to do, but I think it's best that you just try to work out what's going on in your own way, and perhaps you can leave big decisions and for a few days. So do that, and I think today could be quietly profitable. Libra, you are not happy with the status quo. It's just not good enough. Though maybe you're keeping that to yourself. I mean, you're perhaps thinking, well, okay, you're not happy with the status quo, but what can you do about it? As they say, it is what it is. I don't know why that phrase has become so popular recently. It is what it is. Didn't Trump say it is what it is? But Librans might be tempted to say it is what it is because it's easiest to say it is what it is. But it shouldn't be what it is. It can always be better. And from a Libran perspective, you do want improvement. You know that your situation isn't good enough. And it doesn't matter how good your situation or bad your situation is in an objective way. It could be better. And you are in a position to start making things happen to make things better. And you shouldn't doubt yourself. And you also shouldn't be over concerned by social ties and obligations, because it's social ties and obligations are very often the things that hold you back, that prevent you from improving yourself. So you do perhaps need to be ever so slightly selfish. You need to consider what's best for you, accept that things are not as good as they should be, and then to start acting accordingly. Though maybe the way to deal with this issue is not to announce or advertise your intentions. You can improve yourself without anyone knowing. And of course, by improving oneself, it could be some short-term action. It could also be taking some course. A course can last a week, it can last 5 years, it depends. But maybe there's something educational you need to get involved with, or it could just be just studying something. You don't have to do it through an institution. Deciding you want to be good at something, I don't know, finding some YouTube videos, or whatever. Just whatever you need to know to deal with the problem, deal with the issue. And it may be that this concept of self-improvement represents something you've come across today which you can't fix, you can't sort out. And at the same time, you know that you could sort it out if you were to be a little bit better educated on the matter. And, how do you educate yourself on the matter? Well, you can just watch a YouTube video. You don't necessarily have to do a PhD. So that is perhaps your approach, or the approach that you should be. And at the moment, the moon is in Gemini, which is your fellow air sign. It's, Libra is an air sign, moon is in Gemini, that's an air sign. And the moon is sextile Mercury. So moon sextile Mercury, that is a great sextile, great combination for self-education and for improving your knowledge about something. Though we should not forget that Mercury is in Aries, which is a sign which is very much connected with other people. Now, it may be that there is someone who can show you something, who can show you how to do something. So if there's something you want to know, something you want to do for yourself, but you don't know how to do it, it's quite likely that there's one person out there who's just really prepared to show you what needs to be done, and it shouldn't take very long. So if you need some help, particularly help in terms of understanding something, don't be afraid to ask, because I think that you may find that someone around you, you may not even know them very well, is actually a very good teacher for this particular thing that you want to know about. And that's the overall theme for today. Don't be satisfied with the way things are. Things could be better, however good they feel, however good they objectively are. Things could always be better. And don't be satisfied with second best, and believe that you can do things that right now you can't. Okay, within limits. I'm not suggesting that you can teach yourself how to be a surgeon or anything like that. I'm talking about sort of everyday things, everyday problems which don't require a huge amount of technology and expertise, but you can certainly work on them, and things and get to grips with them. And finally, I should say, do think about the longer term. Think about what skills you need maybe in 5 or 10 years' time. Depends how old you are, depends on your situation. And it is true that some Librans today, with the moon going through Gemini, may be actually thinking about their longer-term educational prospects, and maybe you will feel that there is some course or even a degree that you want to pursue. That is a possibility. So it's up to you. Depends on what level you want to take it. Maybe about how to fix something today. It may be about getting a PhD in 10 years' time. But let's keep it simple, and let's focus on the here and now and things that you need to do in the here and now. And don't ignore other people, because some people you know very well could turn out to be great teachers. Scorpio, you are at the moment in a position where you can really make things happen. I think that Scorpios are actually in a very strong position. You're very dynamic, and you can change the world for better or for worse, because today we have an aspect, semi-square aspect, between Mars and Uranus. So Mars is your ruler, and it is semi-square. It's semi-square Uranus. So with Mars semi-square Uranus, that certainly puts you in the mood for action, for really stirring things up. But what is the result going to be? Now, with Mars semi-square Uranus, the results could actually not be very good. You could get yourself into something that you don't understand and just cause a lot of damage. And at the moment, probably, all things being equal, Scorpios are perhaps a little more accident prone than usual. And so Scorpio, it's certainly not a day for taking risks, especially risks with mechanical objects. It's not a day for using a power tool if you've never used a power tool before, if you don't know how to use it, or you can't be bothered to read the instructions. So if in doubt, don't. Yet, that energy, which of course could be very dangerous, could actually be used in a constructive way. I think that you have a great sense of power, a great sense of purpose. It's a sense of power and purpose which I don't think other people are going to immediately be aware of. They may just see you and just see usual Scorpio, perhaps a usual introspective Scorpio. I mean, I'm not saying that Scorpios are introspective, but there is something burning under the surface, and I think you have this awareness that you can really make things happen in your own way, and you have a clear idea about the way you can make things happen, and you believe deep down that there are many things that actually are possible, and you're probably right, though you do have to do the groundwork. There are still some preparations that need to be made. There are still things you need to understand. But the information is certainly available. After all, today the moon is sextile Mercury. And so that moon sextile Mercury is about you making the effort to understand something. And it will probably feel like a bit of a pain. You don't really want to make the effort to understand something. You don't want to make the effort to read the instruction book, but you should. And so I understand that you've got big ideas, Scorpio, that you want things to happen, but before you push these ideas out, before you start to take the action, you need to do the preparation. And it is a preparation time, not just today, but over the last few weeks. Preparation has been important, and preparation continues to be important. And today you can really quietly understand what you need to be doing. If you're contemplating a really difficult, ambitious project or initiative, don't just rush into it. Do the research, and if you do the research, then when the time comes to put theory into practice, you will be in a really good position, and your chances of success will be very high. Sagittarius, there is a certain emphasis on relationships today. I mean, there has to be, because the moon it's still in Gemini. Gemini is your opposite sign, and this moon in Gemini is making a sextile to Mercury. And that almost creates a double emphasis on relationships, because Mercury is ruler of Gemini, your opposite sign. So with moon sextile Mercury, you're in a position where you can talk very easily to the people around you. So if you're in a relationship and perhaps recently communication has been a bit difficult, then now you can talk. The words will flow with moon sextile Mercury. And it's very important to let other people have their say. Because I think there are certain people who have got a lot to say. And they may express themselves with real power and conviction. And in the first instance, you may not be entirely comfortable with this. Listening to people say things in a strong way, can be a bit overwhelming, but I don't think it's a problem. I think it will help move things along, and I think it's a great day, Sagittarius, for really getting to understand people. And once you understand people, then that creates the basis for secure and constructive relationships. I mean, that is surely absolutely logical. So Sagittarius, in terms of a balance between listening and talking, I would have said the balance should really favor listening. There's a lot to listen to today, and I think that you will actually benefit by listening. But that doesn't mean to say that you are going to be passive today. I mean, you don't have to listen, by the way. I'm just telling you it would be better if you were to spend perhaps 75% of your time listening and maybe 25% of the time doing the talking. But in the process of listening, you are allowing yourself to be better respected, and actually it enables you to form strong and dynamic links with other people. And actually today, from a social perspective, I think you can be very successful. I think you can. There are people who perhaps you don't know very well, and you can get closer to them. And if you're on the internet, all this social media, concerned about likes and interacting with people and followers, all that kind of stuff, then if that's important to you, I think you can be successful. And I think the internet can be a good way of getting in touch with new people. It depends on how familiar you are with the internet, but the internet does seem to be something that could really work for you. But it doesn't have to be the internet. It can just be about your general network of people around you. By being dynamic, but also, of course, being prepared to listen, you can increase your network, increase the amount of people who are around you, who you can talk to, and so that does look good. And as far as close relationships are concerned, I mean, it's the same thing. If you want to form relationships with people, and if you want to get closer to people, as I said, it's all about talking, and in fact, it's all about listening. It's all about letting another person do the talking, because the more they talk to you, the closer they're getting to you, and the more you listen to them, the closer you're getting to them. So if you bear that in mind, then I think it's a day that can be, at least on a social sense and in terms of relationships, can really work out for you. Capricorn, you are an authority. I mean, that is standard statement for a Capricorn, isn't it? I mean, if you look at any astrology book, they talk about Capricorn and leadership and being an authority, and you can pile on the keywords with that. But for today, I think that is certainly true. I think that today you are an authority wherever you are. If you're at home, you're an authority. I think that your family will respect you. If you're working or you're with your friends, you are the authority, and I think you need to push this. So if you hear things that are wrong, just make it clear that it is wrong, and you don't have to be aggressive about it. You very clearly state, no, you've got it wrong, it's like this. And it's a day when Capricorns are going to be very aware of not just authority, but government, system of rules, what is legal, what is not legal. And this does mean that Capricorn, if you are an authority figure at whatever level, it's going to be a successful day. And not an exciting day. No, it's not an exciting. It is definitely, I don't think, an exciting day. At least it shouldn't be an exciting day. I understand that there is Mars semi-square Uranus at the moment. That Mars semi-square Uranus does not directly affect Capricorn. It affects the world around us. But okay, so that can create instability. Again, it's not personal to Capricorn, but your sense of authority and what is right and what is wrong, what is possible and what is not possible, perhaps in a legal framework, is going to be strong. So you're able to communicate this as well. So if other people are doing things that are wrong, if they're considering doing things that are breaking the law, or they're going to break, I don't know, municipal code, I suppose it depends where you are. Where I am in Washington State, municipal code seems to be a big obsession. You always have to know your municipal code, and municipal code has so many levels. You've got the county's municipal code, you've got the city's municipal code. It just goes on. But that's something that Capricorns are just going to be very aware of, and so you must not be afraid to show off your knowledge. You might think you're going to get criticism, or if you're dealing with people who seem to have more power than you, and they're contemplating doing things that are wrong, then you might think, well, the easy thing to do is to just ignore them, let them get on with it. But no, you can just quietly tell people, what is right, what is wrong, and that's. And I think people will notice you, and people will accept your authority. And so, in that sense, Capricorn, I actually think that you can boost your authority. In terms of relationships, it's a sort of a mixed day. I think this sense of authority and doing what is right, it may not be to everyone's liking, and some people might regard you as being a bit heavy and hard to deal with. That's not your problem. That's nothing you should worry about, and so that could create a bit of dis-ease. I don't mean disease. I mean dis-ease, a sort of lack of ease, and I think it should be quite passing, and I think that people's response to you may actually change. So when someone gets in touch with you or gets in contact with you, at first sight they may find you a bit overwhelming as being someone that they can't really relate to, but if they give it time, if you spend time with someone, and as they get to know you, maybe over a period of hours, they're going to become more comfortable in your presence, and then they will really start to appreciate you. And that may be the same for existing relationships. Perhaps at the beginning of the day things aren't really working out very well. It may feel that you and someone else just aren't getting on. But if you stick with it, I think there will eventually be a sense of mutual understanding and respect. Aquarius, you are in a situation where you feel that you have a lot to offer and that you have definite abilities, and you feel that they need to be respected and that you shouldn't compromise these abilities. Doesn't matter what the situation is, you feel that you're moving in the right direction and that your talents and skills are really not something to be compromised. And I think you'd be right. Aquarians should really believe in themselves, and if you can believe in yourself, then I don't think that much will go wrong. And at the same time, you shouldn't be afraid of telling other people about yourself and what you're doing. I think people are going to be interested. Okay, not everyone's going to be interested. That's true. Some people are closed-minded. Some people don't understand. But I think enough people will find you interesting and will be interested in what you are trying to achieve, because I think at the moment there is something that you're trying to achieve, and I think you're also trying to communicate it. I think that is very important, and I think that you will be successful, though it might occur to you as you consider what you're all about. I mean, what you're all about. What are you there on this planet for? What are you here on this planet for? What is your creative purpose? It may actually occur to you that just not everyone is on your wavelength. Some people are, some people aren't. And if people aren't on your wavelength, then maybe you don't really have to have anything to do with them anymore. Maybe you can distance yourself from them. You can distance yourself. Yeah, but you can distance yourself from them. And if you want to say goodbye to someone, now might be the right time to do it. In fact, it's possible that someone wants to say goodbye to you. You and someone else have, you understand each other, you know each other, and you know each other's limits, and it may be that it works both ways. So I think that, Aquarius, you should consider a certain changing of the guard, perhaps, in terms of the people around you. Some people are becoming closer because there is a creative sympathy, but with other people, yeah, maybe they're separating, and that's okay. In most cases, we don't need to be with people for long periods of time. Some people are just there for, very briefly, maybe for a few days or a few weeks, and they just move on, and that's okay, because what really matters today is, I think, that it's your creative independence and the respect that people have for your creativity. I think that's going to be really very important. And I think also today, Aquarius, by and large, you're in the right. So if you think that something is the case, even if it's on something quite trivial or apparently trivial, I was talking to Capricorn about Capricorn being in a position of authority, and there are similarities between Capricorn and Aquarius because they both have Saturn as their ruler, and I think that, like Capricorn, you do have a certain sense of authority. Okay, it's perhaps not quite as strong as with Capricorn right now, but I think if you find yourself questioning whether or not you know what you're talking about, and particularly in terms of having a discussion with someone, chances are actually you do know what you're talking about. And so it's important, Aquarius, today that you don't doubt yourself. And that's particularly the case if you're discussing things to do with rules and law. I think in most cases you have got the answer right, and perhaps other people are just being too emotional about it. You know, they're saying, no, this can't be the case. Can't be like that. That's not fair. But Aquarius knows that it is the case. At least knows in most cases that it is the case. Pisces. In one sense, Pisces, you do want to keep yourself to yourself. You're a sensitive sign. Sometimes the world can be just a bit overwhelming, and so you just want to step back, and that's fine. And you do need to recharge to an extent, but you should not entirely exclude the rest of the world. After all, today there is an aspect, sextile aspect between the moon and Mercury, and Mercury is ruler of your opposite sign. So Virgo is opposite Pisces, and so Mercury does represent another person, and could be someone you know very well, could be a partner, could be a friend, but there is an indication that you and someone else can have a lot to do with each other, provided it's on your terms. It's not a time where you have to sort of move off your space, and that may actually be completely literal. There are places that you feel comfortable in. You're on, whether it's your home or somewhere you go to all the time. I don't know, it could be a cafe or something that you keep going to where you just feel comfortable. Wherever it is that you feel comfortable, that's where you should go and talk to people, but on your terms. Certainly not a day for going places you've never been before, not a day for adventures, although that doesn't mean to say that you can't have a powerful influence on what's going on around you, because in fact, when you are somewhere you feel comfortable, you are strong, and your strength will be apparent to other people, and I think that you can be quite a motivating force. So when you set yourself up in your own territory, you can be taken seriously, and you can communicate, and you can, well, I suppose, reach out across the world, because you will feel confident. You will be confident because you're on familiar ground, and that is probably as far as it goes. And that's all you have to do. Though I suppose I have to say that the moon is sextile Chiron, and with the moon sextile Chiron, I'm thinking that maybe in certain cases Pisceans can make someone's life better. You can perhaps dispense some advice and maybe offer help, but I think it's the advice that matters, because we got moon is sextile Mercury, moon is sextile Chiron, and someone's got a problem, and you can perhaps address this problem. What is this problem? Well, from a Piscean perspective, Mercury is in a finance sector, and so is Chiron. So it may be that you come across people today who have got financial issues, and you might be in a position to help them out through your advice, not necessarily through giving them your money, but through listening to them and making suggestions, and perhaps putting them in touch with with places that can help them. And I suppose that also reflects your finances. I haven't talked about your finances, but we can't deny that the moon is sextile Mercury. That is a fortunate aspect. And so with that moon sextile Mercury, Pisces, I would pay some attention to your own finances. I mean, remember, the North Node is in Aries as well, so the North Node is where you should be going. And so with the moon making that sextile to Mercury, I think you can have some good ideas about your money and how you should be dealing with the financial aspect of your life. And it may be that wound I was talking about, that moon sextile Chiron, may be in a certain sense, it could be your own financial wound. You feeling that perhaps recently you've had a bit of a setback in terms of money, but with this moon sextile Mercury and Chiron, I think you start to realize that you can actually get over this setback, assuming this setback happened, and that you can really do something on a financial sense that could be very helpful to you. Okay, yes, you can help other people, you can give other people good advice, but you can also give yourself good advice. You can sit down with yourself, have a discussion about money, and work out what can be done to get over whatever issues have happened in the past, and you can move forward and create for yourself a good financial grounding. Yeah, it's possible. So those are my forecasts for the 12 signs, and I am now going to look at today from the perspective of the I Ching. And the first hexagram I got was decrease. We've had this hexagram quite recently, and it's about having to potentially give something up, having to reduce our activities. And the message with this hexagram 41 is, if you want more, then you need to have less. Less is more. And perhaps there's a sense in which something has to be sacrificed, something we're holding on to which we don't actually need, but it's holding us back. Now, that sacrifice, it might just be an object, something that's been hanging around our house or apartment. It's just been around. It's got some financial value, but we're just hanging on to it. Yeah, it's got financial value, so we got to keep hold of it. Maybe we'll sell it on eBay one day, but but perhaps we've been planning on selling it on eBay for the last 10 years, but we haven't got it together. But maybe it's a time to let go of it, give it away, send it to Goodwill, whatever. It's just not useful. And so perhaps by removing something, one is creating a space for something new to happen. And there is a moving line in this hexagram. It's the third line from the bottom. And what this line is saying is, it's saying three's a crowd. So it's saying that if there are three people who are together, then inevitably one person has to go. And how does it go? Two's company, three's a crowd, or something like that. If there's one person who is alone, then they're attracting another person. So 3 becomes 2 and 1 becomes 2. And so one interpretation of that is, but if we've got too much, we're going to lose. If we've got too little, we're going to gain, regardless of any social dimension. And so that means that we should try as much as possible to be as modest as possible, because if we are modest, we are attracting something. Modesty is about giving something up. It's about also not feeling that we always have to be in control. So decrease can be about authority. I know that it's considered to be the right thing to do, to be in control, that being subservient is not good. But in this case, if we're in a group, in a team, whatever, it's the right place to be might be the person who is taking orders rather than giving orders. And yeah, of course it depends on the situation, but all things being equal, if you're reducing your own power, then you can only gain more. If you've got too much power, you can only lose it. So if you're as modest as possible, you're putting yourself in a position where you can gain as much as possible. And perhaps that is how this hexagram 41 decrease is working. So that third line moves, and the third line, it moves to hexagram 26, which is the taming power of the great. And the taming power of the great, it represents our power. We have power. It is suggesting that we are in a powerful position. And yes, in the past we've perhaps given something up. We've tried to be modest, but this doesn't take away from the fact that we are in a strong position. But somehow we have to tame ourselves. And it goes back to perhaps what I was saying about subservience. In the short term, however strong we feel, we need to put a lid on it. We need to be ready to do what people say, not to make a big, exhibition of ourselves. I think there is that temptation, because it's like a wild animal that's finally starting to come into its own, and it's there, it's ready to go, but not quite. It needs to have some discipline, and so we need to discipline our energy, discipline our more crazy impulses, and not go over the top. And I suppose this perhaps ties in with the fact that today there is a semi-square between Mars and Uranus. That Mars-Uranus semi-square is this crazy, overwhelming power that if it's not contained could cause a lot of damage. And perhaps this is reflecting what's going on here with the taming power of the great. We need to restrain ourselves. Yes, we might be powerful. Yes, we might be strong. But right now, if we were to exercise that power in a maximal way, then we could lose everything. So, bit of restraint, bit of modesty. If you're working or in a group, don't worry about taking orders or doing what you're told. It's a temporary situation, and by doing that, I think that you'll be putting yourself in a good position, even though it might not feel like it at the time. And so perhaps what's also needed here is a little bit of humility. Now I want to look at Volodymyr Zelensky. I do look at his chart occasionally. In fact, recently I've probably been looking at, over the last year, I've probably been looking at his chart too much. And so I'm a bit wary about looking at his chart again. But Yeah, there has been, supposedly, the Ukrainians are saying that there's been an attempt to kill him. They're saying the Russians have been trying to kill him. I think that's pretty unlikely, isn't it? I would have thought logically that the Russians would want to keep Zelensky in power. I mean, Zelensky is, he is very stubborn. Look at his chart. If we look at Zelensky's chart, you see what I mean by this stubbornness. In terms of fixed signs, he has got Sun, Venus in Aquarius, a fixed sign. He's got Moon in Leo, a fixed sign. He's got Mars in Leo, a fixed sign. Saturn in Leo, a fixed sign. He's got Uranus in Scorpio, but that's a generational planet. But in terms of his of the traditional planets, he's got 5 out of 7 in fixed signs, including the Sun and the Moon. So he doesn't back down. He persists. He doesn't want to lose territory, and that's been a hallmark of Ukraine since this war. And clearly, it does seem now that in terms of Russia's strategy of attrition, active attrition, the Ukrainians holding on to things as much as long as possible. That has worked quite well for the Russians because they haven't had to make big offensives. They've been able to just hollow out the Ukraine's army and unfortunately Ukraine's manpower as well. So, in a way, Volodymyr Zelensky, with his stubbornness, not giving away territory until it's really absolutely, not giving away under any circumstances until they really have to. That's really sort of played into Russia's hands, and I'm not quite sure why Russia would want to assassinate him. That does seem implausible. I think from a Russian perspective, they probably want to keep him in power as long as possible. So I don't buy this idea that Russia would want him to die. I'm sure that Ukraine is a very complicated place with all sorts of different factions, and there's poor Zelensky trying to work it all out. Zelensky, who has actually got no water in his chart. He's got nothing in Pisces, he's got nothing in Cancer, he's got Uranus in Scorpio, but Uranus, as I just said, is a generational planet. So effectively, Zelensky has no water in his chart. And so someone who's got no water in their chart, in a complicated situation like Ukraine, where there are lots of different rivalries and factions, it's going to be tough. And how is he going to be able to really understand what's going on? And I do think with this lack of water that Zelensky maybe has a lack of sensitivity because you need water to be able to understand the complexities that he's having to deal with as president of Ukraine. And does he understand it? I'm not saying that he is going to be assassinated or anything like that. When you are president of Ukraine, you are a tool of the collective. You very much associate with the country. You are the nation, and the collective has ideas for Ukraine, and Ukraine will keep Zelensky as president for as long as the collective needs it. So, in a sense, trying to kill Zelensky in a way is a waste of time because he will go when he goes. And that's what happens when you are a politician, and when particularly a powerful politician. Ordinary people, they have a lot more choice. In terms of what's happening at the moment with Zelensky, I think that the starting point surely has to be his solar return for 2024. So he was born on January the 25th, 1978. So here is his solar return for 2024. And this solar return took place on January the 25th. It took place just before a full moon. So there is his. I've set this for where he was born, Krivoy Rog. I've assumed that he was born at 2 p.m. So I have heard people say that he was born a bit later. Someone suggested, I think, 2:07 p.m. But Astro.com gives 2 p.m. and it thinks that's a reliable time. So I've gone for 2 p.m. But you can see that at his solar return set for January 25th, 2024, there was a full moon. And so when you've got a full moon on a solar return, that suggests that this is an important year. And something has to give. The truth is out. And this full moon is, it's tied in with Pluto. Pluto is... that Pluto will not transit his sun, I think, until next year. But so Pluto's not quite there yet, but it's still tied in with Pluto. It's tied in with Jupiter. So yes, it's a really strong full moon, and that full moon to me suggests that this might well be the year when he stops becoming president, when something just has to give. It's too strong. He cannot carry on as before. And I suppose with the moon in Leo might represent the people in Ukraine who are perhaps in some respects getting tired of him. I think people in the West perhaps overestimate his popularity. I've had commenters saying that, oh yes, he's incredibly popular and so forth, but maybe he is, maybe he is not. I'm not in Ukraine, but from the perspective I get is that he perhaps is not as popular as many in the West think he is. And that may be reflected also by any recent assassination attempt. Now, from a converse point of view, we've been talking about converse transits, converse directions. His converse solar return, so this is set for 46 years after he was born. So let's go 46 years before he was born, which would take us to 1932. So this is solar return. This is his solar return set for 1932, 46 years before he was born. And so in this solar return, we can see that there is a Sun-Mars conjunction. I mean, that is the main feature of this solar return. And I suppose with the Sun-Mars conjunction, this may be about him feeling he has to be assertive. It looks as if that what happened after his birthday was that he made a move against some of his potential rivals. For example, he fired the commander-in-chief, what was his name? General Zelensky. He fired, and that was a big deal. Zelensky refused to go. It took Zelensky a long time to get rid of Zelensky. So there was a power struggle pretty much immediately after his birthday. And that was perhaps reflected by the Sun-Mars conjunction in his converse solar return. And that will be a feature for the next year. Sun-Mars conjunction could represent danger. I mean, we know that's obvious. I mean, clearly, being president of Ukraine is one of the most dangerous jobs in the world. It has to be. And as I said, it's not just because the Russians might be trying to get you. There are a lot of other people, I think, trying to get you, including perhaps the Americans. Remember that there are strong parallels between Zelensky and Nguyen Dien, who was the president of South Vietnam, who, when the Americans were sick of him, they lionized him. Lyndon B. Johnson called Nguyen Dien the Churchill of Asia. He called him that in, I think, 1961. And then 2 years later, the Americans and the CIA were involved in his assassination. And so likewise, Zelensky has been called the Churchill, compared to Churchill. So we shouldn't be surprised if the people trying to kill him are actually they may not just be Ukrainians, it might be the Americans. So a lot of people trying to get him. Why would the Americans want to kill Zelensky? Well, they may feel that they need someone else in charge in turn, to move things to the next stage. He may be surplus to requirement by now. So that's his converse. That's his converse solar return. So as far as what's going on in terms of transits, so main transits happening to Zelensky. Let's just do. Let's compare Zelensky with I don't know, the positions of the planets. Positions of the planets today. Why not? Can see that main thing going on. Okay, Pluto. We do have to say something about Pluto. Pluto is at 2 degrees 5 Aquarius. So Pluto is relatively close to his Sun-Venus midpoint, but it didn't get all the way there. So he doesn't have. Pluto is not going to be on his Sun this year because Pluto is now going retrograde. What Pluto is doing now is it is going retrograde out of Aquarius and into Capricorn. And Zelensky has his Mars at 015 Leo. And so Pluto is going to get to the opposition of Zelensky's Mars in the next few months. And then it will go station, and then it will go. So towards the end of the year, he will have Pluto on his Mars. But you could say, well, it's not quite there yet. He's already had Pluto on his Mars at the beginning of the year. He survived that. And I think the way Zelensky responded to Pluto on being opposition his Mars was it was all part of that full moon, of that solar return. Pluto opposition Mars is about a power struggle, and that's why he got rid of people, in particularly, the commander-in-chief, General Zelensky. So that was at the beginning of the year. But of course, there is the scope here to backfire, and we always now, because Pluto is so close to the opposition of Mars that we do have to consider triggering transits. For example, when Mars goes into Taurus. Remember, Mars is in Aries. So Mars goes into Taurus when does it go into Taurus? On the 9th of June. So 9th of June, Mars is going to make a square to Zelensky's Mars. Now, that in itself is not a particularly unusual aspect. It's sort of, on average, it happens every 6 months or so. But or at least the opposition, every 6 months. Mars takes 2 years to go round on average, so it will make squares. Every year there will be a square between Mars and Mars. But the thing is, it triggers Pluto. So you're going to have Mars square Pluto at the beginning of June, and that is going to be on his Mars, and so that, I think, could create some difficulties for him. So that's those are some of the transits going on right now. Another transit that I do find interesting is Neptune. It's not obvious, is it? Neptune's at 2912 Pisces, and the thing is that Zelensky has his Mars-Saturn midpoint. There's Zelensky's Mars, and you can see how his Mars and Saturn are quite close together. His Mars-Saturn midpoint is at, I think it's at 1432 Leo. So Neptune is going to make a sesquiquadrate to his Mars-Saturn midpoint very soon. I make it, I think that's 1432. That's going to be very soon, around the end of May. And so you might be asking, well, so what? The point is that Zelensky has the Aries. The Aries point is on the Mars-Saturn midpoint. So he has got the Aries point sesquiquadrate his Mars-Saturn midpoint. And so if you've got Aries on the Mars-Saturn midpoint, it can be an association with a lot of death. Let me just read you what Alfred Witte says about Aries on the Mars-Saturn midpoint. He says, general periodic working, general interruption of work, sickness, separation, death. But I think that Witte has actually understated that, because if you've got Aries on the Mars-Saturn midpoint and you are a politician or someone who's got a lot of power, that means that you have the capacity to be involved with a lot of death. And I know that Zelensky has said that only 31,000, I think, Ukrainian soldiers have been killed in this war. I mean, the real figure is at least 500,000. And, that is another feature of Zelensky. He is, he's a PR man, isn't he? I mean, truth is not the point. And you remember, Zelensky has got Neptune on the 7th house cusp. So Zelensky is someone who can be economical with the truth. And the reality is that with every Aries point sesquiquadrate his Mars Saturn midpoint, then he's associated with a lot of killing. If Zelensky had come to an agreement with the Russians in Istanbul in spring of 2022, none of this would be happening. Of course, someone has to consider the pressure that was put on him by Western powers not to have an agreement with the Russians. It was actually a very good agreement, now, at least from a perspective of now. If you actually look at it, I mean, Russia was just giving so much away, I think. But no, the West saw it as an opportunity to break Russia. That's what the war is all about, I think. But anyway, Neptune is now moving on to his Mars-Saturn midpoint, and it's moving on to his Aries point. So Neptune is really triggering a key point in his chart. And I think that he's perhaps starting to move into a sort of a rather dangerous phase here, where he perhaps is unaware or doesn't feel completely aware. I mean, he may know, but not be aware of the sort of damage that is being caused and is building up around him. And I think that this Neptune hitting his Mars-Saturn midpoint at the beginning of June could actually be really difficult. Turning to his converse transits, so I just wanted to look at what was going on for Zelensky when you move things back to 1932. So this is, you take today, which is, I don't know, May the 10th, and you look at how many years have elapsed since from May the 10th to his birthday, and you move that back the other way. And so these are his converse transits for today, which is actually, these are the positions of the planets for October the 12th, 1931. So for May the 10th, 2024, if you reflect May the 10th, 2024 through Zelensky's birthday, you get to October the 12th, 1931. And so I just wanted to see what these converse transits were doing for him. I mean, we can just look at the overall picture. So in October the 12th, 1931, there was a Saturn-Uranus square. So that Saturn-Uranus square, which happened nearly 100 years ago, is starting to impact Zelensky, because there it is, incredible pressure. And look at the sun. Right now, today, the sun on on around October the 11th, 1931, there was a T-square involving Sun was opposition Uranus and it was square Saturn. And that T-square in 1931 is on October the 11th, 1931, is really starting to affect Zelensky. And I think on May the 10th, on May the 10th, 2024. So time goes in both directions. And I wonder what is happening with Zelensky. I mean, I think the Saturn-Uranus square is going to hang around for a long time. And I think that when you're looking at converse transits, unlike direct transits, you actually look at close aspects. I think that can be important, even if those close aspects don't actually affect or aspect the natal chart. So in some ways, the converse transit may actually be more important than the direct transit. So let's just overlay that with Zelensky's chart to see how it's linking up with. I think that's okay. So I think I've got that right. Okay, so there is. It says there is Zelensky's chart in the middle, and these are the transits. So there is his Pluto at Zelensky's Pluto at 16 Libra. So over the next couple of days, from a converse perspective, the sun will be square his. So the sun will be conjunct his Pluto, and you can see that from a converse perspective, Saturn is, remember, it's going backwards, so Saturn is starting to move towards the conjunction of his Mercury. Now, so remember, this is a converse, and so because Saturn is going direct, we're thinking about Saturn going backwards. So I think that over the next few weeks I'd have to look at the ephemeris to see exactly how fast it's going, but there you can see on 1931, you see there's a Saturn, actually there was a Saturn, in 1931 there was a Saturn-Pluto opposition, which was square Uranus and opposition the Sun. So the Sun right now in Zelensky's chart, the Sun in 1931 there was actually a grand cross 46 years before he was born. Sun opposition Uranus, and that was it. That was hitting Saturn and Pluto. So I think that looks fairly impressive. And Jupiter is on his. Jupiter's conjunct his moon. Now that's interesting, isn't it? Now Jupiter conjunct the moon gives a different, it seems on the surface of it, gives us a very different flavour, doesn't it? I mean, Jupiter is a fortunate aspect, and it is aspecting the moon. So does this mean that some things are actually going well for him? Do we take it literally? It needn't necessarily be the case. I think it was actually William and Harry, from a converse point of view, one of them, their mother died on their Venus return, on their converse Venus return. I can't remember which one, but Jupiter conjunct Moon, something has to give. And it may be fortunate, but it may, because Jupiter is often associated with bang, things happening. So maybe that Jupiter is not as fortunate as it looks, particularly when we see that Mars was square Jupiter on October the 12th, 1931. So that Mars is Mars is conjunct I think when you look at the overall picture, it's actually not quite so good. If you look at Mars, Mars is conjunct Uranus, Mars is square Jupiter, and it's all hitting his. I mean, so that Mars square Jupiter in October the 12th, on October the 12th, 1931, is actually hitting Zelensky's moon square Uranus, and that might be of concern. If it was just Jupiter, I'd perhaps be optimistic, but more optimistic. But when you realize that his moon is square Uranus, and 46 years before he was born there was that Mars square Jupiter, I don't think that it looks quite so positive. So I don't know. I think over the next couple of days I would have thought Zelensky does need to be careful. But I am not predicting that there's going to be a successful assassination. I certainly don't think that the Russians want to kill him. I know that Ukrainians like to say the Russians want to kill him, but I don't think that's the case. But I will be coming back to Zelensky's chart. I hadn't really looked at his Converse transits, solar returns, before, and I think it does offer sort of a new venue, new way of looking at Zelensky's chart. So I did say that it was going to be a Zelensky update. There was a lot more I wanted to say about Zelensky, but I ran out of time. So thank you very much for listening. Sorry I didn't cover more than I wanted. I didn't cover more. I did want to look at his inauguration chart when he was inaugurated as president in 2019, because Jupiter is actually going over the conjunction of the Sun, of his inauguration Sun, because he was inaugurated, I think, on May the 20th, 2019. So when the Sun was at 29 Taurus, and Jupiter is currently about to go on to 29 Taurus. So I did want to talk about that, but I didn't get a chance, so perhaps I'll do that on another day. So, thank you very much for listening. I hope you found that video useful. And if you enjoyed the video, I'd be very grateful if you were to like it. If you're not subscribed and you enjoyed the video, I would be super grateful if you were to subscribe. And if you want to buy me a coffee, there is a link in the description. So thanks again for listening, and I will talk to you again tomorrow.